night may be long and the dark may be deep, but the answers are there to be found. Whether it's the normal, the abnormal, or the paranormal, you're in the right place. Let's go beyond reality.
Good evening, good morning, and welcome. It's Beyond Reality Radio. I'm your host, JV Johnson. Thanks for being here with me tonight. We are going to be talking about occult issues, occult topics, and Nazism specifically. Stephen Flowers will be our guest tonight. He's an author and a scholar. We'll talk about Nazi occultism and the shadowy secret king of Germany, known as, well, his real name was Karl Willigut. We'll be talking with Stephen in just a few moments. Looking ahead to what we've got on the show, we've got some, as always, great topics coming up. Tomorrow night, we've got two guests, one in each hour. In the first hour of the show, we have a rescheduled Cassandra Snow. She was supposed to be here, I think it was last week, maybe it was the week before. And we had a last-minute schedule change, or I don't remember exactly what happened, but we did have an issue. So she'll be here to talk about tarot cards and her new book called Queering the Tarot. And then in the second hour of the program, Chris James, author and paranormal researcher, will be here to talk about cases from his new book about paranormal investigations. Of course, Friday night is always a best-of program. And then as we skip ahead, Monday will be Claire Waters. Claire is a holistic wellness coach. She's also the mother to two psychic medium children. And she's going to be talking about her book, Raising Faith, which is about her experiences of raising psychic children. The name of her children names are Faith and Tom. So that'll be Monday night's program. I'm still a little bit put off here. Orion came out of the production booth and was looking for food. Sometimes we have listeners send us care packages, which I just opened up another one from our good friend, and listener from Ohio, which I'll talk about in the closing remarks of the program. But thank you for sending that. But, so we get little goodies, little candies, chocolates, or stuff like that. And Orion is out here scrounging around in my studio area looking for chocolate. I don't know. I don't know what to say. I tell Slick to keep him in there, but, the lure of the chocolate is just too great, I guess. Okay, so a couple things to mention before we go to break is we need you to stop by Scaricon.com and just take a look at the event that's coming up. Some really, really cool stuff going on June 7th through the 9th in Framingham, Massachusetts. I won't go into the details because you can find them all at Scaricon.com. Also, swing by YouTube if you haven't found the YouTube channel that we stream live on. It's a great place to go and subscribe because you can also see the archived programs there. And there's some bonus content as well. A lot of great stuff at YouTube. Just search for JV Johnson. And then finally, swing by the Facebook pages for both Beyond Reality Radio and my page as well, JV Johnson. Give them both a like or a follow or whatever it happens to be. And then you'll just stay in the know as to what we've got going on during the show. A lot of great stuff, of course. Our phone number for calls later in the show, 844-687-7669. And we'll invite those calls in the second hour. Okay, so we're going to get ready to bring our guest in. Stephen Flowers will be with us to talk about Nazi occultism. It's Beyond Reality Radio. Be right back.
Scaricon New England, the fan convention for all things pop culture, horror, and paranormal, is almost here. June 7th through the 9th at the Sheraton Hotel and Conference Center, Framingham, Massachusetts. Scaricon brings an amazing group of celebrities, including Cassandra Peterson. You know her as Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. Elvira. Heather Langenkamp, Amanda Wiss, and Lisa Wilcox from the Nightmare on Elm Street films. Plus, a 40th anniversary cast reunion and screening of the cult classic Phantasm. And many more. Scaricon also features panel discussions, film screenings, great vendors, and parties. It's a weekend of fun from start to finish. For more information, visit Scaricon.com or check us out on Facebook. Use the promo code BRR at checkout to save 25% on your admission. That's Scaricon.com. Scaricon.com. Scaricon New England is being held June 7th through the 9th in Framingham, Massachusetts. Visit the website today. Use promo code BRR with your ticket purchase to save 25% on admission.
All right, welcome back to the show. Remember Cyndi Lauper? Kind of an icon of the 80s, right? I think she had a little bit of a comeback not long ago. She was touring or something like that. Anyway, welcome back to Beyond Reality Radio. I'm JV. Our phone number, write it down for later in the show, is 844-687-7669. Let me try those last four digits again, 7669. We will be taking your phone calls later in the show if you have questions or comments. Tonight we're going to be talking with Stephen Flowers. Now, Stephen has been on the show before. He's an expert in fraternal organizations, the occult, and historic groups. We talked about a secret organization, a secret brotherhood in Germany when he was on the program last time. His website is seekthemystery.com. He's got over 50 books to his credit, and it's a real pleasure to have him back on. Stephen, welcome back to Beyond Reality Radio.
Oh, hello. How are you doing? Yes, I'm happy to be here.
Well, we're happy to have you back. We're going to be talking about occultism and Nazism tonight. We're going to be talking about the connection. So let's start out right there. What is the connection between the occult and Nazism?
Well, it's very complex. That's one of the problems in the whole literature of this topic, is that a lot of times people, authors, whatever, pick some kind of idea or some kind of fetish, whether it's the sacred lance or the Cathars, or you name their little hobby horse, and that's what they hang their theory on. And in fact, the questions are extremely complex and are rooted in the movement, the great cultural movement, almost entirely unknown and explored especially by Americans, is the whole German Reform movement, Reformbewegung, which began about 1880. And so in Germany, there were alternative views of many things that were rooted in the late 19th century. And one of the things is that the whole generation of men who were the Nazis themselves were children of this movement. There was, let's say, most of them were born between 1890 and 1910, let's say, somewhere in there, and they would all be children of people who actually adopted many of these ideas. Hence, among the ideas that would be popular among them are things like vegetarianism, anti-drug, alcohol kind of health, beauty, beauty of the body, health of the body, natural interests in nature, the power of nature, and so forth, and all of these things. This explains why this Adolf Hitler is a teetotaling, vegetarian, anti-vivisectionist, because all those things, for example, would be typical of Reform movement people in Germany. And so that is something that is almost entirely lost in most of these discussions, and that's where much of what a true understanding of what was going on can be gained from that.
It's probably important to get an understanding or a definition right out of the blocks here. When we talk about occultism or the occult, what are we talking about?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's very academically. That's very easy to define as a definite definition. Now, what is occult is, of course, it means hidden, but really what we're talking about is our sciences and or ideologies, theories, mental constructs, etc., which are either yet to be established, but they are unestablished. That is, they are either something which has been rejected by current scientific or consensus reality as being legitimate. Astrology is considered occult, when 500 years ago it was considered part of science. But now it is rejected knowledge, and so hence occult. Or there are things which are yet to have been discovered or made a part of consensus reality, but which at the time they're being practiced would be then therefore considered occult because they have not yet been established. That's one of the areas in which the Nazi occultism excels. Many times when we will uncover these, what were Nazi occult ideas, people say, well, that's just advertising. That's just, well, it's been accepted now. But if you read Mein Kampf, it's full of all sorts of occult ideas. He suggests, for example, we hold our rallies at night because at that time the human mind is more susceptible to receiving ideas. Hitler repeatedly spills the beans in that book as far as, because it was so, he was too anxious to show people and prove to people, or some people, what a smart cookie he was, and most people didn't read the book anyway. So, but there's a lot of things like that in there. Why our banners are red? Why we have our rallies at night? Why? And the idea of now I hear advertisements all the time on the radio. Oh, get your logo on this item. Your logos sell. La la la. Well, Hitler knew that. The swastika is a powerful logo.
Yeah,
that's how that works.
That's a great point. And I actually did read Mein Kampf in college. I was just so curious. I was a real student of World War II. And, you're told over and over again that Hitler laid his plans out in black and white in that book, and it was just ignored. And for all intents and purposes, it was laid out. Everything was right in there. Mm-hmm. And he followed it.
And then including how he... how these things were engineered, how this way, he had this mysterious power over the people and the audience, this, that, and the other. Well, there's definite ritualistic, symbolic acts. Some of them have been fully adopted by rock and roll musicians and whatever now in their concerts, but certain things he did. And of course, he was not alone. There were other people like Albert Speer and others that were instrumental in designing these mass movements. I remember when we'd have fire drills in school, in elementary school, how it seemed so powerful to see all the kids like moving out in columns, across the field and that sort of thing. And just people moving in unison for a purpose. And these kinds of motions, of course, Leni Riefenstahl films this in Triumph of the Will and this sort of thing, but people actually experienced it, and that's where that kind of magic works. And to say that it's not magic is just because it's kind of like people say, I'm a runologist, of course, and a current crop of scientific-type runologists. It's like, what's so magical about runes? It's just writing. Of course, to these schoolboys who all of us, who grew up having letters pound into our brains from the first grade, writing and reading and stuff like that does not seem so magical. But to a pre-literate people, of course, it's a totally different experience. And in fact, it remains a mystery as to how it all happens in the brain, reading and writing and that sort of thing. We lose sight of the miraculous oftentimes. We get so used to experiencing it on a daily basis that we lose sight of how magical certain things actually are. But in this case, of course, many of these things were new and still to this day, of course, people can be bewitched by these images of Nazism because they were magical experiments quite consciously. Yeah. And that includes things like the logo, like the rituals, and so forth.
And we're going to talk more. We're going to talk more about that. We have just a couple of minutes before we have to go to break here. Mm-hmm. Why is it that we are so we continue to be so intrigued by Nazi Germany? Now, of course, there were some amazing, unbelievable atrocities committed. And it was, the whole thing was a tragedy in every respect. But yet there are still certain things about that lesson in history that fascinates us. Why is that?
Well, growing up as a school kid back in the 60s, all of our fathers were World War II veterans, and they seemed to be quite a not too hysterical attitude towards Nazism. We had a famous sitcom called Hogan's Heroes, where
one of my favorites.
German prisoner of war camp is a place of comedy. Now that would be unthinkable.
Yep.
Unthinkable.
Yep.
And so we have demonized Nazism much further as it's become an abstraction. The men who actually fought it were, in some sense, fascinated by it also, and that their children, that is myself, were introduced to it, of course, in all those ways. When we played Army, which is our favorite thing to play, everybody wanted to be the German. Why was that? Well, they have the neatest equipment. Their tanks look good. Their helmets are beautiful. Everything about it just looks so fantastic, And so there was this intrigue at that level of the people who were there and their children, but subsequently something more twisted, dark, and sinister has happened, having nothing to do with Nazis, having nothing to do with what they did, but rather the desire on some people's part to create a demonic symbol, which Nazism has become. So everybody's calling somebody else a Nazi nowadays. They don't know what the hell it even is, right? They could spout anti-Semitism in one sentence and be calling a person a Nazi on the other, not even knowing that they themselves are spouting Nazi ideas in the previous sentence. They don't even realize that because they're just labels. It's kind of like the Nazi magic, the way in which that worked. The witchcraft that Hitler practiced, and that kind of thing, is using big lie, attaching symbols, both good, the swastika, and evil. What they said, that's evil, that's bad, the Jews, and how you demonize a people just with a label, and how you heroize your own side with also logos and slogans and not thinking. Don't let them think.
Don't let them think. Yeah, that's key.
And so that's the thing. We got to be emotional, just like evangelists or whatever. How they suck the people in and with an emotional appeal.
Okay, we got. Sorry, Steve. We got to go to break here. We'll be back to talk more about this. Did you know that online retailers like Amazon have constant deals that can save you money on the things you buy every day? It's no joke. Save 40%, 50%, even 80% on great products, and all you have to do is know about them. Noodle Shark is the way to be alerted when something good is coming your way. Noodle Shark is the social media page that lists great deals that not only save you money, but give you the deals before anyone else has them. All you have to do is find Noodle Shark on Facebook. Search it as The Noodle Shark. That's The Noodle Shark, because you deserve to save too. Become a shark and save. Our guest tonight, Stephen Flowers, author, scholar. His website is seekthemystery.com. He's the author of over 50 books. Tonight we're talking about the occult and Nazism and the connection between the two. And we're going to continue that conversation and also take your phone calls in the second hour of the program at 844-687-7669. Stephen, I guess this is a good point to introduce a central figure in all of this, from what I understand. Who was Carl Willigut?
Carl Maria Willigut was a rune esotericist who he was an Austrian military man. He retired and around the turn of the century, shortly after Guido von List started his writings in runic kind of esoteric studies. Willigut picked up this thread and became somewhat of an aficionado in this sort of thing himself. He was a quite old retired person, and his eccentric ideas apparently didn't sit well with his wife, who was probably wanting to divorce him anyway. She used these ideas, or accusing him of having these ideas, and got him committed to a mental institution. So when he got out of there, he left Austria, is a native Austria, and went to Germany, where he then there fell in with being an old guy. You know, he had this kind of respect. Oh, he's into all this runes and things like that, mostly younger people. And Guido von List had died in 1919, so he was kind of like, oh, we have another old man here. And so he had a lot of prestige that way. And so he wrote some articles and things like that for these nationalistic, esoteric organizations like the Edda Society and others, and he got one of the members of his circle there around Munich was an SS man, and so he introduced Himmler to this person, to Willy Gut, and so Himmler brought him into his entourage and named him or recruited him into the SS, which was just, could be, it wasn't a fighting group, it was a uniformed unit, but it was, could be scholars and all kinds of things. And so that's how he fell in with the SS, with, as far as the trajectory of the history of how he got there. And so he was a person, Himmler was interested in collecting all kinds of objects, things, ideas, people, you name it, that he could try to coordinate into some kind of vision of a new religion or a new culture and that sort of thing. If there had been no Himmler, if his personality and interests had not been what they were, more than half of all the things we think of as, quote, Nazi occultism, quote, would, not be there. It was his personal obsessions which are responsible for a great deal of the record of this kind of thing that we have as far as the hard, cold facts are concerned. And so that's how he got in with them. And because political organizations, military organizations, being the dog pack or wolf pack kind of culture that they are, people below and wanting to get to the boss and, say, I'm jealous of this guy and his influence with the boss. He was called Himmler's Rasputin by one author. And so they said, well, he's a bad influence on the boss, so they dug into his background, found out he had been committed to a mental institution, and so therefore he was, quote, career, in quote, his SS career was over, and he had to be, pensioned or retired, and he had to leave Himmler's circle at that point, at which point he was toward the end of his life anyway. But that's the sort of his story. And he wrote actually very little. All of the things that he wrote about this topic and subject are all included. The texts are all in the book, The Secret King, that I and Michael Moynihan wrote and is published by Feral House at this point.
So when was Willigut's influence? Was it pre-war? Was it during the 30s when the Nazis were rising to power, or was it at the height of the power?
Yeah. No, he was out by the not during the war times. It was more in the 30s that he
right.
had written most of his works, and it was at the end of the 30s and the very early 40s that he actually was. He designed the death head ring that's used by the SS, famous ring that they wore, and others. That has like one of the symbols on it is like a personal sigil of his for his mythical family. He like others in this sort of circle of Guido von List people, as well as the Willy Gut sort of circle, did things, back in my day, Wiccan people would always say, oh, my family has this ancient tradition. We didn't get this out of a book, see. We get this from my great-grandmother was a hereditary Welsh witch, see. And it goes back to the Stone Age, actually, our whole family. And, now I'm teaching it to you in my living room. Now, and so that was typical sort of stories you'd hear in the 60s and 70s, whatever, among them. And again, that was kind of new and weird, when you heard it then. I said, well, now you dig into these German stories about these people, you find they were doing the exact same thing. It was this idea that I'm the secret king of Germany. My family goes back to this ancient time. We are a clan or a tribe of the ancients that, are now making themselves known once again, and you too can be a part of it kind of appeal, right? Which, it's unlikely to have been true, but it's a powerful myth. And we need myths. They are very powerful. And so using such myths are part of it. But they had pioneered that also. So that Willy Good was thought to be this secret king. Guido von List had the same thing has happened to me on occasion, whereas someone writes a book, I had a book about runes or whatever, and then somebody writes to me and says, you have uncovered my family secret.
Right.
What you say in this book is exactly what my great-grandmother taught me in the woods back when, And then tell me about that. And then they'll just spit back to you what you've written, And you go, no, it's a psychological trick that certain people play on themselves. Whether they believe it or not, I don't know. But they actually say, what you said is what I mean to say, but I can't. I haven't said it. I won't say it. But you have said it, and here, but you're. And so the writer, in this case Guido von List, not myself, because it seemed untrue to me, will jump on that and say, here's a guy who corroborates my conclusions. And so this guy will then. This guy by the name of Tarnhari, which means like the secret Lord. A man contacted List and said, hey, I've got my family teaches the same thing you're teaching here. And List bites on it and says, oh, yes, this guy, see, he corroborates. I am right. I have rediscovered this ancient way. And, of course, what's happening is the guy is reading it and he gets influence in the group by corroborating the master's suppositions. And I think that's, I've noticed, now I'm 66 years old, it's not all that old, but pretty old, and I've seen a lot of things, I experienced a lot of things in the social, cultural realm of this kind of world, so that many times things I read about now from the past, I say, that's happened. I mean, I've seen that happening before my very eyes before. And so that's the story of Willy Good.
Now,
I think that mainly he was a Listian but tried to hide and say he was insisting that he was doing something different from Guido von List. But really, when you sort of look at it, they're very similar.
When we talk about Himmler and his connection to occult and other what we might be considered metaphysical or even witchcraft type ideas, Himmler was known to actually have castles, if I remember correctly, that were dedicated to the purpose of these types of ceremonies and rituals and I almost said sacrifices. I don't necessarily mean that, but ritualistic behavior. This was something that was a very, very big part of Heinrich Himmler's life.
Right. Well, they had their schools that were like academies for SS men, and of course the most famous of these, one that's passed into legend, due large measure because of the black magical working done there by Michael Aquino of the Temple of Set, is the Wewelsburg Castle in Westphalia.
Yeah. Right.
And where up on the floor of this, there's a tower there, and it has two levels, lower level and the upper level with a marble type floor, and upon that floor is emblazoned in a sun wheel, which has become famous as the so-called black sun symbol, and which will, by displaying it, apparently gets you banned from Facebook nowadays. But in point of fact, that's again something that is absolutely a after the fact mythic understanding. The thing on the floor is a sun wheel, all right, and Himmler thought that looks great because it looks like it's made up of 12 Sig runes, the S rune, which it may or may not be, but it certainly is a sun symbol. It is taken from a Alemannic brooch design. The Alemanni are a Germanic tribe that lived and still live in the Black Forest region of Germany, and that's where that tribe was closest to the Romans. So that's why we have in Romance languages the word Alemanni is used for all Germans because they were the closest Germans to them, and so that it's a sun symbol from that time period and place from the 600-700s or something, and there was nothing more to it than that. But subsequently, after the war, there's a lot of mythologizing. There's a mythologizing of Nazi Germany after the war by both those who want to demonize them and those who want to worship them. You know, and
right.
That's kind of the atmosphere we lived in post-war. But Himmler, there again, you see that he would say, well, this symbol, where do we find the symbol? Well, the archaeologists have dug up these brooches, sir, that have this symbol on. Oh, those look great. That looks just like that. What does that mean? Well, let's make it mean this. Those are like S runes. Yes, and that's what that'll mean. I have a correspondence in the archives and so forth where Himmler will write to archaeologists, runologists, etc., and he'll ask them honestly, what does this mean? Because he's looking for somebody to tell him some key to power that he can get, and they'll say, well, it means this, or we don't know what it means. And then he'll write back to him saying, well, I think we should make it mean this, and that's what it's going to be. So he would consult, but then his own imagination would take it on down the road, you know, and it would become something that was essentially a manifestation of his imagination. Right. And so that's fine. That's what a lot of people do. But that's how that happened. So then, because they documented so much, we have that kind of on record.
We talked about the power of those images that the Nazis used to gain followers and allegiance. And other times we've had people on this program talking about witchcraft practices and talking about the power of getting many, many people focusing on the same type of spell, if you will. Is that a similar phenomenon? Is it this group energy that's created by many, many people doing the same thing at the same time?
Yes. I mean, except here, two things. Both the mass rallies, which were very large, obviously, and so the people who participated in those directly were able to focus on that. Then that's why also the Nazis were interested in the production of propaganda films. That's why Leni Riefenstahl and her work was so effective, and also why she's unfairly demonized today. She did her job too well. And then also, of course, whether it was radio, you might remember, I can't remember the name of the science fiction movie that Jodie Foster made, like Contact or something like that.
It was Contact.
And that the first video broadcast sent out on the planet was a speech by Hitler.
Wow.
So that was broadcast, the first broadcast ever on the planet, and so they were pioneering these things. But the focus of it, as you said, this idea that we're going to focus this on a idea, a purpose, and direct the people, and that's, again, you having read Mein Kampf, you see that's what the whole purpose is. Hitler himself says, why did I become an anti-Semite? Well, it was my father, my family were not anti-Semitic. I was nothing like that. We didn't care one way or the other. But I wanted to forge a national consciousness among all German people, even Austrians, all German-speaking people, into a nation. And he said, and I discovered that we need to have an enemy,
common enemy,
in order to do this. And at that moment, he says, at that moment, I became an anti-Semite, because it was just a means to an end for him. Right. It wasn't like it was for 98% of all the people who were anti-Semitic, just rooted in medieval Christianity. It was for him a mode of mobilizing people.
Tomorrow night's program, we've got Cassandra Snow in the first hour. She's a tarot card reader, also a teacher and a writer. We're going to talk about her new book. It's called Queering the Tarot. And then in the second hour of the show, Chris James will be with us. He is an author and a paranormal researcher, and we're going to be talking about paranormal cases from his new book. Friday night, of course, is a best of program, and then we've got a bunch of great programs set up for you for next week as well. And at the end of next week, Scaricon will be upon us. I will be gone Thursday night. Bruce the Shark Markison should be here. I haven't gotten a confirmation that he's going to be filling in, but I think he will be. And he'll be with you Thursday night of next week, and then again on Monday the following week as I go to and then recover from Scaricon. And then I think the following week I'm going to be in the Pittsburgh area. There's an event there called Living Dead Weekend. It's a celebration of George Romero's films. And I'm scheduled to go there. So I'm working out the details of that. That should be a great weekend near Pittsburgh. So a lot of great stuff coming up. Tonight we're talking with Stephen Flowers. Stephen is an author and a scholar. His website is seekthemystery.com. He's got over 50 books to his credit. And tonight we're talking about the occult, particularly how it relates to Nazi Germany. It's a fascinating discussion, and our phone lines are open now if you'd like to comment at 844-687-7669. And Stephen, in several times during this discussion in the last hour, you were talking about runes. Let's talk a little bit about what runes are. I mean, I think most of us have an image that comes to mind when you say the word rune, but what's the real definition of what a rune is, and how is it important?
Well, before most of our ancestors, Germanic people, wrote anything in Latin letters, they wrote things. Certain people did. Very few, less than 1% of people were ever literate in runes in antiquity. But they wrote their language in this script, which defied many of the rules and normal procedures concerning alphabetic development. Most of the time when culture takes on a writing system, they adapt the one that they adapted from. They do so with minimal changes, and the order of the letters and all kinds of things remain the same. And so they're not trying to be different. It just has to be different to reflect their language. But in the case of the runes, they were reordered, they were given names, which is a very unusual thing for alphabets to have the letters of them to have names. We are used to that with the Semitic system, we're most familiar with the Hebrew letters have names that mean something, but and the runes do, and Ogham characters in Ireland also did. But those are really rare exceptions in the history of writing. And the runes, the word rune, means a secret or mystery. And so it is both a tool whereby secrets or mysteries are encoded, but also out of which they can be drawn. And for the first 1,000 years of the history of this system of writing, we really don't have clear examples of them being used for profane purposes. In other words, a bill of sale or somebody doing something of a practical, ordinary nature, which is where you first find writing. In most people, that's what they're doing with them first. And in the case of runes, they were used apparently for magical purposes. Let's just use a shorthand way of saying it, first and foremost. And so that continues on, and that is the mystique of them continued through time, and they became symbolic, if you will, of the native or the indigenous kind of culture. So that, for example, in Anglo-Saxon England, monks and people, Christians, who were literate in Latin and wrote in Latin letters, also cultivated knowledge concerning the runes. And for example, there's a telling example, when an Anglo-Saxon pilgrim would go to Rome, there are many of these examples in Rome where at a church somewhere they would carve their name, graffiti. They would carve their name. I was here. They want to stamp their name the same reason people write their name everywhere when they go to a place. Kilroy was here, etc. They wrote their name. But what did that English person write his name in? He wrote it in runes. He could have written it in Latin. He was probably a priest or a bishop or something. He was probably a cleric who was perfectly literate not only in Latin letters, but in Latin as well. But he chose to put his name, his identity, is English. He is an Anglo. He's an Anglo or a Saxon. And so this runes express his heart, his indigenous self, unique and different from other people. So it has that, it conveys that message as well. The system in which you write conveys some meaning beyond just an arbitrary system that you could have chosen to write this or that. It doesn't really matter. No, these are our letters, you see. And so that's indicative of the power of them, even on that level. That was not really magic in the sense of trying to do some kind of spell or something, but rather it is magic in the sense that I am expressing my deepest self and impressing my deepest self upon the environment here to identify myself, plant myself here.
So it's the identity. It's the identity and the personal connection that gives it its power.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and some of the inscriptions that have baffled some people, they don't baffle me particularly because I think I've figured out what it means. My dissertation, which I wrote in 1984, talks about this. Runes and Magic. It's available on Amazon. An inscription just says, Ek Erilas, I, the Arulian. That's it. That's all it says, just carved into a stone, into a cliff face or wherever. Just, what is that? Well, it's a title. Arulian, it's not his name, although sometimes they use a magical or name or sometimes in the inscriptions. But this is a title. It occurs in several inscriptions all over, and it means something like the rune master, or someone who knows runes. It comes down to our word is Earl, but it's a title. And so why would somebody just carve, I am the rune master? That's it. Well, it's an idea that this is like a certification. I am capable of carving these. This is who I am, and I'm going to take this nebulous idea that may be floating around in my brain and literally, as we say, like, well, it's not carved in stone. Yes, this is carved in stone. So this has become real. I am this thing. I have transformed myself I have impressed this transformation upon the universe in the form of writing. And we again, like I mentioned earlier, we oftentimes lose sight of the miraculous power of writing. But it is miraculous power, and then when we go back to people who first start writing, it is more clearly understood of how they thought of this process of writing, of taking a word, a spoken word that's just nebulous, it's invisible, and making it visible, and making it something that is impressed upon the objective universe for all to see, and for those who can read, and that's one of the things that comes right directly out in some of the old runic inscriptions. At the end of them, they'll say, good luck, or, power to him who carved them, good luck to him who reads them. Now notice the power of that phrase, just when you just translate it to say, well, I'm conveying power. Mm-hmm. And I'm conveying it to myself first. And the first part of the formula is in the past tense. I carved it. Well, you're reading it now, but it may be centuries later that you read this, because it's here forever, carved in stone. And then I can convey luck or power to a person in the far distant future. And the idea was that when someone reads these things, which are not necessarily always made to be as easy as possible to read, only those who really knew could read them. And so by reading them, you got luck, you got power. Later on, it was Christianized. Sentiment, same thing. It'll say, God bless him who carved them. God bless him who's reading them. So it continued on beyond conversion to Christianity. The sentiment and the power and the formula continued to carry on through that way. But those kinds of things show how these runic inscriptions against them. Well, so what? Is this saying good luck? But no, these people were conveying this thing through writing, and that's because they realized how powerful this thing is. And over time, to transcend time and space and all kinds of things that are limitations of human consciousness are overcome with this writing system. And so that's what some of the important things about runes. Yeah. And now, of course, again, going to our topic of Nazism, people have crazily start to identify runes with National Socialism simply because among the logos they might have used, which they did use, were runes. Why did they use them? Because they were popular. They were a part of popular culture in Germany in the early part of the 20th century. And so they took advantage of that. That's all. That's all there is to that. They're not a Nazi thing. Right. Our peace sign, the famous peace sign used in the 60s, is a rune. It's a death symbol.
Interesting.
I wrote about that. It specifically means I have a thing I published before. I'm going to publish it again here soon. But a thing on the origin of the peace sign. There's actually a placard that I've reproduced there where it shows this peace sign being used as a death symbol, and it's kind of like a belligerent. Then it was picked up by the left, by the communists, and this is what this placard kind of thing comes from. And it means, it's like a skull and crossbones. It's like saying, we're coming for you, we're coming for you, we're going to get you. And this is like a skull and crossbones. Skull and crossbones is used by the SS, by the way, on their cap, does not mean I'm a mean, bad bastard. It means I am willing to die for what I'm doing. Also, they're wearing black as a uniform doesn't mean I'm a badass black guy, like, wearing black stuff like a pib in San Francisco or something. Yeah, I'm bad. Look, you say for me, I'm more dressed in black, man. I'm really tough. No, it meant it was a peasant army. black was the color of peasantry. And so the SS uniform being black was a sign, like the Protestants or priests of the Catholic Church, wearing black is a sign of humility. That was what it was symbolically meant to convey, that we are a peasant army.
Wow.
And that also the skull and crossbones means traditionally in German military symbolism that I am ready to die for the cause.
But I just wanted to ask you about your books. You have about 50-plus books. If somebody was to be introduced to your work for the first time, which of the books would you recommend they go for?
Well, that depends on what avenue or angle you want to come at it from. I would say if you're interested in runes, you would go to the book Rune Lore, published by Wiser Books, Rune Lore, and in general, Germanic sort of this whole movement, or the big picture is go to the first volume. We're going to do 3 volumes, a book called The Northern Dawn, a history of the reawakening of the Germanic spirit. It's published by Arcana Europa Press. And that's really sort of foundational historical material that people really need to understand first before getting off into the weeds, as it were. The weeds are a great place to be, but if you don't have the context of historical, that's one of the things that's so lacking nowadays, is just the historical context of...
Again, tonight we're talking with Stephen Flowers. His website is seekthemystery.com. Stephen, I want to address a couple of things that are on your website, just for some clarification. You talk about the lodestar, and you talk about a communication of ideas and practices in the Indo-European, Germanic, Mazdan, and left-hand path traditions. What is all this about? You obviously have a mission here. What is it?
Well, my basic understanding is that things that I study and things that have affected the cosmos most of all, supposedly, is something that began on the steppes of Eurasia, a group of people that have essentially shaped the world we live in, but who remain, for most people, in extreme mystery, which are the Indo-European peoples, out of whom come the Iranians, the Indians, the Germanic peoples, the Italic, the Greek, Slavic peoples, and all. And that there's a common root to all of these that is clearly traceable, and but knowledge that was lost to us until about 200 years ago, and both scholars and others have been endeavoring to recover this knowledge, coordinate, and sort of synthesize this material. That is why people say, man, you've written about a lot of strange things. Some of them are out in left field. I've written a book, just completed one on esoteric interpretation of horror films, for example. That's pretty much out there. But otherwise, it's everything comes from this Indo-European basis. Now, to really, you have to dig into one of these fields, which is my field, so Germanic, but I also studied Celtic philology, and I've studied Indo-European Vedic things, Sanskrit, Iranian things, and so forth. And when you get the common root, and you understand the common root, then these different things they're not all the same, for certain, but they do have a common root, which is very important. Human values, beliefs, structures that when we realize them and actualize them, we as a species, or we as a people, are most happy. You know, if you go back to the very origin of these people, our deepest ancestors, the Indo-European peoples, they domesticated the horse. They were the first people to domesticate the horse, to ride the horse. And so the whole idea of freedom, of moving fast at high rates of speed over open spaces in freedom is the picture of happiness to a person living 6,000, one of our ancestors living 6,000 years ago, or today. That explains the exhilaration one feels when in this kind of circumstance, and so that's how deep, visceral, and profound these cultural values and mythic paradigms are. But yet they are, although we enact them quite frequently and export them to other cultures as well, they remain generally unknown, unconscious, and unrealized as far as being aware of where these things come from. And the reason why they are difficult is that they oppose the so-called Judeo-Christian values. And so, therefore, and not because they're set out to oppose them, they're just our thing as opposed to their thing. And so that is why people fear it so much, is that it, although, most everything that's inherited from this Judeo-Christian tradition is also heavily impregnated with Indo-European ideas, because Judaism itself was transformed in the image of the Persian philosophy in the time period of the Babylonian captivity. And for example, and in the time of Jesus, that Jesus himself was part of what was called a Persian party or something along those lines. It's been shown how close his teachings are to Zoroastrian ideas and so forth. So a lot of this is testimony to the power of these Indo-European ideas, and that a lot of it is explicable. I've written 3 books on the Mazdan tradition, one published by Inner Traditions called Original Magic, which is a curriculum of initiation into Mazdan spirituality, Zoroastrian, if you will, and then also The Mazdan Way, another book, and then The Good Religion, which is an outline of sort of Mazdan religion for the West. And that contains, some of those books contain chapters on these ideas of the origins of these ideas in Christianity and Judaism, or that they were put there. The Garden of Eden mythology, for example, is a pure Persian story. It's just twisted in a way that, that the idea that there were originally a man and a woman in a garden and a tree and all that is all a Persian idea. But the point of the original story was God, that is Ahura Mazda, the wise Lord or Lord Wisdom, wants humanity to partake of these trees in order that they become good fighters for consciousness against the evil forces, which are categorized as things like ignorance, stupidity, cruelty, violence, and so forth. And that wisdom and eternal life is the birthright of humanity, and that we are all, as human beings, actually here because we all volunteered in the spiritual world. Our souls volunteered to come here to fight for the cause of Ahura Mazda, the wise Lord. But in so coming into this world, we are beset by forces of stupidity, ignorance, greed, all these terrible things, and that when we were imperfect and we are wounded, all wounded warriors, essentially, right? That we've been interfered with, our consciousness, etc., is constantly being attacked by forces which are causing us these forces are characterized first and foremost by the word the lie, the druj, the lie. And what is this lie? The lie is you are bad, you are evil, you are stinking, you are dead, you are going to die, you are stupid. All of these things, people say, oh, the tape's playing in my head. Well, that's these divas, these demons, if you will. But they are all playing this interference, this kind of thing, and that's the lie. You are mortal. You will die. But see how the story of Adam and Eve and the whole thing with the way that in the Judaic religion, it gets completely twisted in the sense that God punishes people with death, all this kind of thing. But you look at the image of as Jehovah is depicted in the story as it comes down after it's been sort of altered. That entity seems to be a demonic entity that has created humanity and then put them in a Kafka novel. Well, there's rules, but I can't tell you what they are. Well, you broke one, so it looks like you're out. Looks like you're condemned for all eternity as a species because you broke that rule you didn't know about. And all of this kind of stuff. That entity is not on humanity's side. That entity wants people to be ignorant and lacking in knowledge and all this kind of thing. So the story is of Iranian origin, but the purpose of it has been altered, and then people say, well, why? Well, if religion is a tool to enlighten people, as should be, then it's inexplicable. The story and its purpose is inexplicable. But if the purpose of religion is to control and coerce people into behaving the way that the powers that be, as St. Paul said, the powers that be want you to behave. It's a system of coercion and command and control. If that's what it's there for, then the Genesis story is the story for you. But because it says man is bad and it's all man's fault. And the only way he can get out of this pickle is through God's grace. So God will just arbitrarily decide, I'm going to save you. You have nothing to do with it, and that's it. And so you are a damn sinner, and you can only be saved by God's grace. And we in the church, or we in the religion, monopolize this commodity called salvation, and so you have to come to us to get it. So it is a system set up for command, control, and coercion. If that's the purpose of religion, then we see it played out from the Middle Ages on. But the Mazdan way, the Indo-European way, is not that. It says humans, individual humans, have to develop their faculties, and this to the highest degree, to be the best fighters against ignorance, stupidity, violence, and so forth. That's why Plato was called, or his contemporaries, he was a Persian, an admirer of the Persians, and he was accused by his contemporaries of being a reincarnation of Zoroaster, and so forth. So all of the philosophers, Greek philosophy, we so oftentimes identify Greece with this philosophical tradition, when in fact very few or little of Greek life was dominated by philosophy. It was mired in the violence of the Spartans, or the mob rule of the Athenians, their democracy, this mob rule idea. But the philosophers, well, Socrates, one of the founders, was put to death for his activities, and so they were not popular, or we think of them as being the exponent, the perfect exponent of Greek culture, but really they were a sort of minority population that thought that way. But a lot of it comes from the Persians, the concepts, because here's philosophy. What does the very word mean? It means loving wisdom. What does the god of the Persians mean? It was wisdom, a Mazda. That is wisdom. Ahura Mazda, Lord Wisdom, and loving wisdom is what you do. What's the highest endeavor of religion, and so that is. But and Dean, the word for religion, means really insight. That once one has insight, understanding dawns, and insight is awakened in a person, then you don't have to be coerced or into behaving properly. You behave and you're ethical from that point on, because you realize that what is essential in this system is that the choice that is shown between Adam and Eve, between saying we make this choice to do this thing or that thing, that choice is something that, according to Mazdan way, is something that every human being makes every moment of their day, of their lives. They're constantly making this choice. It's not like you've made this choice once, you've messed it up, and now only a supernatural intervention can possibly save your sorry behind. No, it's like you have to work and educate yourself and become enlightened and so forth. So that is the way of the philosopher. Both the Greeks take this, and to their tremendous credit, they put this system of thought into a language which is intelligible to us today. If you translate the Greek, this is the way in which they taught this system is a very clever way of conveying it to many more people than you will see elsewhere. But that is part of what's going on in my endeavors to look at this. And the Mazdan way is a kind of a universal Indo-European system of religion or philosophy that was originally Zarathustra, who lived probably about 1700 BC, had this great insight. What is the insight originally? Is that the things that we call gods, or that he's a trained priest in the sacrificial cult of the Iranians, very much like the Vedic Indians, almost identical. He says, these things that we call gods, you people, I even learned, and I think, that these entities are like men that are greater, bigger, live on another plane, as it were, but they're very much like humans, just like we read in Greek mythology, Zeus and Hera. They're all like bickering, and they all have their passions, and they're very human in their way of thinking. And he said that's not true. That's an error. That the gods, the true gods, are actually abstract principles, such as love and truth and beauty and all these things. These are the true gods. And if there's one God from which all the others come, which is wisdom, the absolute highest form of divinity is consciousness.
Stephen, we're just out of time.
Pure, focused consciousness.
And we've just run out of time. Thank you so much for being here. Mm-hmm. Are all your books available on your website?
No. The best place to get them is Amazon. Okay. That's where I would direct anyone and everyone, because at my website you kind of order it from me, and I'm really busy more writing than filling orders and doing things like that.
Well, thank you.
Like most people, Amazon is the place to get them. Look for Stephen Flowers or Edward Thorson on Amazon, and that's where you'll find almost everything quick and easy.
Thank you so much for being here, Stephen. It's a real pleasure. We'll have you back on the show again soon. It's Beyond Reality Radio. That's going to do it for tonight. Tomorrow night, Cassandra Snow and Chris James on Beyond Reality Radio. We'll see you.
Beyond Reality Radio is hosted by Jason Hawes and JV Johnson and produced by Alexandria Johnson and Slick Eddie Edwards for Entercom Radio. Beyond Reality Radio is distributed by Westwood One Radio Networks. Stop by our Facebook page and say hello. Follow the hosts on Facebook as well. For Jason Hawes, follow at jasonhawes.taps. For JV Johnson, follow at JVJ Paranormal. If you'd like to be a guest on Beyond Reality Radio, or you have a suggestion for a guest, contact Slick Eddie Edwards at slickeddieedwards@gmail.com. Be sure to visit our chat room as well at beyondrealityradio.com. Thanks for listening.